It's the amazing Rico Brogna podcast with your host, Evan Roberts.
Rico Brogna time from the precipice of losing a series to the Colorado Rockies, which, let's all be honest, on Wednesday night, stuck in this just mud of a 2-2 game with the Rockies. It felt as if we were going to lose a series to the Colorado Rockies. But from that feeling, that muck that they were in Wednesday night, to pulling out the game late, Francisco Alvarez's big triple, Francisco Lindor, the game winner, Edwin Diaz holding on to an explosion in Thursday's first inning, to a nice, comfortable 2-out-of-3 series victory against the Colorado Rockies. And shockingly, due to the help, thank you, Milwaukee, thank you, Brewers, the Mets are in a wild card spot, which feels foreign considering maybe the emotions we had about 3 days ago. Now, I admit, on the last edition of the Rico Brogna, the drunk edition of Rico, I may have been a little emotional. All right, you may have seen my inner fears around this team start to explode, especially after a disgusting loss to the Colorado Rockies. And even though I wasn't drunk yesterday during Wednesday's game, as they were stuck in the muck, and that's how I would define game 2 of this series, tied 2-2, unable to get the big hit. They're given this incredible break in which Ryan Feltner comes out of the game after one inning, and it's basically turning into a bullpen day against the Colorado Rockies, and they can't hit. They muster out only 2 runs, one of which came against the Colorado bullpen. It was a feeling of despair on Wednesday night. But baseball is a funny game, man. Things can change incredibly quick. And what they did in that 9th inning, pulling that game out, it changed at least my emotions, and it changed all of our emotions, especially because they were able to respond and win the finale of this series. So as we sit here today, towards the end of this never-ending West Coast trip that's taken them into, 4 different time zones, really 3 different time zones, I think the feeling we now have is calm. And one thing that helps the calm, let's be honest, and I said this on the other side, when Arizona never loses and San Diego never loses, it helps that the Atlanta Braves are a mess. It helps that despite the Mets tripping up and losing 2 out of 3 to Anaheim and losing the opener of this Colorado series, they've been able to gain ground on the Braves because they're a freaking mess right now, which is half the battle. I mean, honestly, making the playoffs is the goal. So if the Atlanta Braves are going to crumble, so be it. Not our problem. Now, let's get to both games. We got a lot of emails to read, the ricob@gmail.com. I don't know if you could hear it in the background. I was very lucky on my vacation day here in North Carolina. We had a beautiful day. The tropical storm had gone away. It was sunny all day. I was on the beach. I was DVRing the Met game, and I was watching a little bit of it. Then I was DVRing it again. It was a beautiful vacation day in North Carolina. And then at about, I'd say 8 o'clock at night, the skies have reopened. And it is absolutely pouring. I don't know if that's still the hurricane. I don't even know anymore. But the rain is coming down. Last night, and Hoff will tell you, I thought about doing a Rico after the dramatic victory. The only problem is, in the house we're staying in, it was swaying back and forth. That's how bad the weather was last night. I think it was like 50-mile-per-hour winds. The rain started to come through the door. Luckily, I was keeping my scorebook protected because my scorebook has seen enough water over the last 2 days. But either way, I'm surviving, you're surviving, we're all surviving. Now, let's get to these games. I actually want to start with game 2 of this series, the game on Wednesday night, because I think that where this season goes, where this West Coast trip goes as well, really helps determine how we feel about games, how big a win was, how brutal a loss was. If they're able to succeed with the rest of this West Coast trip, I think we may look back at game 2 of this series against Colorado as it was ugly, but such an important victory. There are certain games in the season that feel a little bit more important. If they lose that game, a game in which, like I mentioned, Ryan Feltner, the Rockies starting pitcher, comes out after one inning with, I think it was forearm tightness or whatever it turned out to be, and you can't hit Noah Davis for 4 innings. You can't hit Chasen Shreve. You can't hit, what's this guy's name? Angel Chevali. You can't hit any of this Colorado bullpen because the Met offense was ice cold. And you lose game 2 of this series, it would have felt worse than just losing to a bad team. It would have been the way they would have lost to that team. So major credit to Paul Blackburn, who in his second start as a New York Met continues to do the same thing, which is get himself into trouble and then get some kind of big strikeout to get out of the thing. That's basically the Paul Blackburn model, like we saw in Game 1 of the Anaheim series and we saw in Game 2 of this series. He gives up that home run to Ezekiel Tovar, who for whatever reason has become like a Met killer. He gets in a little bit of trouble in the second inning with a 2-out walk, gets out of it, gets in a bigger trouble in the third inning, a leadoff double to the ninth place hitter, Jake Cave, and he's able to get out of it. A huge strikeout of Charlie Blackmon looking, then a comebacker to get out of that inning. He gives up another leadoff double in the fourth inning, gives up an RBI single on that infield hit, and then manages to kind of fight through that inning. And that was an inning that also included a pass ball by Francisco Alvarez, whose defense has gone a little bit backwards. And we'll get to that a little bit later on. But Blackburn was in trouble every single inning. He got into trouble in the fifth inning because of Jeff McNeil's brutal error. And he was able to meticulously, and again, he did this in that Friday night game against Anaheim, just be able to fight out of trouble and give this team 6 strong innings. So wonderful performance by Paul Blackburn, made up for the fact that after the Mets scored those 2 runs early in the game, the clutch RBI single by Pete Alonso, give him credit. It was clutch in the first inning, sort of forgotten about because of the way he struggled the rest of the game, a couple of big strikeouts, and really the rest of the offense struggled. They get the run in the second inning on the bad Colorado defense. But after that, again, you're facing a Colorado bullpen, which turned into a bullpen day when Feltner was hurt, and they couldn't do anything. They didn't even muster a lot of rallies. But again, when you have that kind of struggle, you need guys to step up. And Paul Blackburn did a great job giving him 6 quality innings. And then our man, I love Big Budo and I cannot lie. We all love Big Budo and we cannot lie. Gets into early trouble, gives up a leadoff hit in the 7th inning, commits the balk, and then again makes every big pitch necessary to get through that 7th inning. Gets through the 8th inning. Gives him 2 quality innings out of the bullpen. He is such a weapon out of that pen because let's be honest, if the Mets don't score in the top of the 9th inning, there's a really good chance Budo comes out and pitches the bottom of the 9th inning and keeps going. And basically that game could have gone as long as Jose Budo was going to hang in there and continue to put up zeros, which he did for the 2 innings he was in there. But you go to the 9th inning, it was so essential in that 9th inning. And remember, they're at the bottom of the order coming up that they break through. You can't risk going to extra innings. You can't risk giving the Colorado Rockies one swing that potentially ends the game, which is the danger zone of when you get into a close game late, especially in a ballpark like Coors Field. And so I thought the top of the 9th inning was very, very important. And Francisco Alvarez hasn't done much. Even in this game, he struck out in his first 2 at-bats. He has not hit a lot. I mentioned briefly, and we'll talk about it a little bit later on, his defense seems to have gone backwards. But to the credit of Francisco Alvarez, he has the balls to swing 3-0, which was great to see. I think there was a time in which the old school baseball fan in me would cringe every time someone's playing 3-0. Like, I guess growing up, it was only for the truly great players, the truly great hitters. And now you kind of look at it and say, you're going to get a great pitch to him. So why not swing 3-0? And Alvarez swings 3-0. He rips that ball to right field. He's also running right out of the gate, which is so important. This ballpark is so big in Colorado that you can get triples. And with this Met offense struggling the way they did, every base is important. So he's able to race out a triple, which was monstrous. And the other guy who deserves a lot of credit is Ben Gamel and Carlos Mendoza. Because think about the situation. You got a runner on second, a runner on third, I should say, and nobody out. You're going to pinch hit Alvarez for more speed. They did that with Harrison Bader. And you have Ben Gamel coming up. Ben Gamel never plays. It's easy to forget that Ben Gamel is even on this team. So Ben Gamel is due to hit. You've got J.D. Martinez on the bench, who did not play in this game. You've got Mark Vientos on the bench, who didn't play in this game. You've got a lot of options if you want to pinch hit for Ben Gamel. By the way, the room I'm in is shaking again from the wind and the rain. I'm not sure if anybody can hear any of it, but we may have a live, top of a house collapse here on YouTube. I hope you guys enjoy that, or a podcast. Pete, I give you permission. You can still post it, even if I'm dead. Anyhow, what was I saying? Oh, yeah. So It is so weird. I think they build these houses in North Carolina, like prepared for hurricanes. So they put these things on stilts. And I think my wife was telling me it purposely moves back and forth. Somehow that helps it from tipping over. I have no idea. All I know is that this room is shaking. It feels like I'm on a boat right now. And it is absolutely pouring. Again, not sure you can hear it, but I'm giving you the description that it's biblical rain here in North Carolina. So Mendy had a choice. He had a choice. You can go to J.D. Martinez, you go to Mark Vientos, or you can stick with Ben Gamble. And the reason why I agreed with what Mendy did, which normally I wouldn't agree with, normally it would be, wait a second, you got to run around third, nobody out. You got J.D. Martinez on my bench. Why wouldn't I just go to him? And if they want to walk him, fine. Put him on base. There's nobody out. Like, you're not going to play back for a double play anyway, because that's going to allow the lead run to score in the top of the ninth inning of a baseball game. But the reason I liked it was because J.D. Martinez and Mark Vientos haven't hit. So number one, I'm going on the recency bias that neither guy is hitting, which I think is a part of why they didn't play in this game. And number two, Ben Gamble had some damn good at-bats. Like, one thing that was really impressive about Ben Gamble, and it happened early in this game, and it was an important play because it led to a run. Ben Gamble swung at the very first pitch he saw in the second inning and lined a base hit. And it is kind of impressive because Ben Gamble, in a weird way, is like the Mets' Evan Fournier. He never plays. So to expect him to contribute when he does play, when he never plays, is unrealistic. Like, it's a small criticism of Mendy, and I know it would lead to us bitching even more, but you almost want to try to do a better job of making sure that every guy on your roster plays just a little bit so that when you have to play them, there's a better chance they're going to contribute. He barely plays Ben Gamble, whatever. Haven't been losing sleep over it, just an observation. But to the credit of Gamble, first pitch he sees, he rips a base hit. His second at-bat, he went 400 feet to center field. His third at-bat was a hard-hit ground ball towards second base. So I liked what he was doing. All I need is contact. And Ben Gamble gave you this really quality at-bat in which he drew a walk, which ideally, if you're Victor Vodnik, you don't exactly want to do in this spot with Tyrone Taylor and then top of the order coming up. So great at-bat by Gamble. Tyrone Taylor gave you a great at-bat. He's played very well the last couple of days, especially his defense. He made some great defensive plays, especially in the finale of this series. So they both draw really important walks. And then, look, Lindor, I'm not even going to waste time on because that's the obvious. You know, when a guy gets a game-winning hit, a two-run single, he is Francisco Lindor. We know how valuable he's been to this team. I mean, I could sit here and wax poetic, but y'all know. So what the hell's the point? So I'd rather talk more about Gamble's walk, Taylor's walk, and Alvarez's triple, because those are the moments of a baseball game that sometimes you forget. But it was very, very important for Lindor to get that hit. It was also very important for Jesse Winker to get the RBI single to give them another insurance run. 2-run lead with Edwin Diaz, you feel decent about. A 3-run lead, you feel a lot better about. And Jesse Winker put together a 3-hit day where he was batting third and was the DH. So really clutch hitting in the ninth inning. Very, very important for this team, especially with the way they've been struggling offensively. And I know it wasn't like going to be some kind of big losing streak if they lost that game, but 2 in a row to the Rockies, especially when they've struggled against the Marlins all season. They just lost 2 out of 3 to the Anaheim Angels. You see the Diamondbacks and the Padres basically winning all the time. It would have been a horrible loss. I mean, it would have been arguably one of the worst losses of the season. So credit to them for coming through offensively in the ninth inning. You know, Edwin Diaz was fine in the ninth. He gives up the leadoff triple, but after that bears down. And the Mets get themselves a very, very important victory. Clutch hitting, great relief pitching by Jose Butto. I love Big Butto, and I cannot lie. And a second straight, very impressive start by Paul Blackburn to begin his Met career. So wonderful win on Wednesday night. But Thursday became really, really important. You got to win a series against the Colorado Rockies. You can't lose another rubber game after losing a rubber game to Anaheim. You can't have a 3-4 trip going into these 3 difficult games in Seattle. So I thought Thursday, too, was a very, very important game. And to start the way they did was great to see. I was also a little concerned about Vientos. You know, Vientos didn't play in the game we just talked about. It was the second time in 3 days he didn't play. He's got, I think, a little bit of an ankle issue. He looked a little bit slow defensively at third base. So my brain is starting to worry, like, is he okay? So it was very nice to see him in the lineup. He was batting fifth, too, in this game. He had a home run, which was great to see. But what they did in the top of the first inning against Austin Gomber was very, very important. It really relaxed anybody who was sitting there on a Thursday afternoon looking at this game with the level of importance that I did. To come out and get 4 consecutive extra base hits. I guess it's the first time they've ever done that. Top of the first inning, 4 straight extra base hits, whatever stat they came up with. But to jump all over Gomber, to take the pressure off of David Peterson, who's like a freaking good luck charm, man. Every time this guy pitches, the Mets give him instant offense. But Lindor behind in the count of double, Iglesias behind in the count of double. That was the really cool part. The first 2 extra base hits to start this game, both came behind in the count. Lindor was 1-2. Iglesias was 0-2. J.D. Martinez, fresh off his off day, hits that kind of lofty fly ball to left field that drops. And then Pete Alonso. I think I've said this a lot. I think a lot of Met fans have said this a lot. Pete is very, very important in the second half. We are all waiting for that hot streak, that period of time where Pete can kind of lead this offense, be the kind of offensive player that can carry an offense. And he gave you a jolt in that first inning. It's already 2-0 sure, but he hits an absolute bomb of a 2-run home run to take a good first inning into a great first inning. He hits a home run a few innings later. He's now got 25 for the season. But more than that, more than him hitting 2 home runs in this game, the hope I have, and this is, I guess, my eternal hope after a guy performs well, can he build off this? Can this be the stretch in Colorado to start where Pete gets red hot and carries this offense? We'll see. But that was a great first inning, jumping all over Austin Gomber. David Peterson gave you another really good performance. How about the defense in this game? Tyrone Taylor made some incredible plays defensively in left field. Lindor made that leaping catch at shortstop. It was a nice, relaxing, comfortable pummeling of the Colorado Rockies. And it was essential. Like, this was a very important series to win. You know, I think I talked about this on the Drunk, Rico, and I have no regrets saying this. One thing that's been so frustrating about this team over the last few years is their inability to beat the bad teams consistently. You know, I think we're still all haunted by 2022, where they had that soft schedule final month of the year. And while they didn't collapse, like I'll always argue, the Mets didn't collapse necessarily at the end of the 2022 season, unless you want to include the Atlanta and San Diego games. But they didn't do well enough against the bad teams. And if they did do well enough against the bad teams, then the series against Atlanta wouldn't have mattered, and they would have won the NL East anyway. And then who knows what happens? You know, maybe they get knocked out in the divisional series. Maybe they don't. Who knows what we're talking about? So this has been going on for a while, where they just don't do a good enough job against bad teams. And I get it. It's baseball. You're not going to beat bad teams all the time. But the Mets have been average against them. Look at the way they've played against Miami. And the last 2 games against Colorado could have turned an opportunity against a Rocky team that's 42-74. I mean, they were on their way to losing 100 games. You've got to do well against them in the 6 games you play. Mets end up going 4-2, which is fine. You win 2 out of 3 in each place. I'm not complaining. But the way things were looking in game 2 of this series, it didn't exactly look that way. So I think it was very, very important to come back and win the last 2 games of this series. And think about where they now are on this road trip. They're 4-3. So going into this trip, my goal was 6-4. I laid it out with 2 out of 3 in Anaheim, win the game in St. Louis, 2 out of 3 in Colorado, and I'll give you losing 2 out of 3 to a solid Mariner team. Well, now, because they lost the 2 out of 3 to Anaheim, to at least keep my schedule intact, they got to go out and win a series against the Mariners, who, by the way, aren't playing great. I mean, you know, the Mariners are an above 500 team. Sure, they're better than Colorado and they're better than Anaheim, but they're not great. They pitch very well, but look at this offense, especially without J.P. Crawford and Julio Rodriguez. So the Mets certainly have an opportunity to still make this a very successful West Coast trip at 4-3. And look, here's the reality. I don't want to give you a loser's mentality. If they do lose 2 out of 3 to Seattle, a 5-5 trip is not the worst thing in the world. It's not. I'm not saying it's great. I'm not going to celebrate it, but 5-5 would at least be deep breath. Okay, it could have been far worse. So 3 more games coming up in Seattle, late night games, which I freaking love. I love West Coast. Got to tell you, I love West Coast games. And I can't guarantee you a Rico after Friday night's game, but I would say at least there's a chance. There's a possibility. Saturday, there won't be a Rico because I think I'm going to watch that game at about 2 o'clock in the morning because I'm driving back from North Carolina. But let me get to some of your emails. A lot of people had opinions, including somebody that guilted me off of the drunk Rico, which I do want to read first. David Solomon. David, I appreciate this email, but you made me feel very bad. Here's what David writes. Evan, you're normally such a reasonable person and Mets fan, but the other day, admittedly in a drunk Rico, you and so many other fans had such an overreaction to the Mets' first game loss in Colorado. Before the road trip, you outlined your hope and expectation for the trip. 2 out of 3 in Anaheim, win in St. Louis, 2 out of 3 in Colorado, and 1 out of 3 in Seattle for a 6-4 trip. The Mets are currently 1 game off the pace after pounding the Rockies on Thursday. They head to Seattle with some momentum, a rested bullpen, and is getting healthier and a 4-3 record so far. If they win 2 out of 3 in Seattle, they will arrive at the 6-4 trip, just not the way you calculated. So why were you freaking the F out after 1 effing loss in Colorado? It was a bad loss. Every team has them throughout 162 games. The Mets are going to win some games you don't expect, sweeping the Yankees, and lose a couple you wish they didn't, Anaheim or Colorado. When you sit down at a blackjack table in Vegas, you don't expect to win every hand, and you don't complain to your friends when you lose 3 out of the first 4. You ride it out and hope you come out on top when the night is over. I don't necessarily have a World Series expectation for this team, but it's a fun, mostly likable group playing at or above expectations. And more than anything, I believe in David Stearns, who's building the team the right way. He's kept it flexibility with the payroll for big contracts and a farm system infused talent, or to deal off when he seems fit. Have some faith. Maybe those mixed drink ices are giving you a brain freeze. So, David, I warned you. I warned everybody. When I do a drunk Rico, and I have to admit, very drunk, okay? To the point where waking up the next day, not a fun experience. Okay, not a fun experience. I mean, it was just, I had a pounding headache. The room was spinning at 6 a.m. I would admit that this drunk Rico, as compared to last year's drunk Rico, was much more of a drunk Rico. I was drunk last year. This was over the top, to the point where I can't even look at another drink. Like, I'm done. I'm done for like multiple weeks of drinking. Now, I say that because I ask you this, Dave. Are you really going to judge me based on some of the things I said on that drunk Rico? Are you going to hold me to? I don't even remember half the stuff I said. Now, one thing I admitted, I am a very lovable drunk. I get emotional. I say a lot of I love yous, which I think I may have said to Pete. But I'm also very, very honest, and I will reveal my fears. And I think what I revealed in that Rico is my deep down fear about this team. My deep down fear about this team are all the things we saw. And I'm not even going to bring up like the past. I'm going to bring up the last couple of years because I think that's fair. That's who this team is. When we talk about struggling against bad teams in September of 2022, I do think that's a fair thing to bring up. A lot of guys who are here were on that team. So I think what happened on that drunk Rico, which I have to own, I still published it, we still did it, was those are my inner fears. And when you lose a game the way they did, a lifeless offensive yuck fest of a game, I think it brought to the surface a lot of the inner fears I have about this team. But you are right. Like, when I was speaking rationally going into this trip, which I knew wasn't going to be some kind of like waltz, just because you're playing the Angels and just because you're playing the Rockies doesn't mean you're going to go 9-1. Like, it's still a lot of travel. It's still a challenge. These guys are still humans. And so I stand by 6-4 being a success. And you are right. But you also have to remember one thing. You're saying this now after they won the 2 games, after losing the first game of the series. Think about how you felt, if you're being honest, after they lost the first game of this series, and they're sitting in the muck of a 2-2 game with the Rockies when the Rockies starting pitcher comes out after 1 inning due to injury, and the game's tied 2-2. It's not like we were all sitting there calm and relaxed in the 8th inning of that game, said, don't worry, this road trip, this is exactly the way we expected. But listen, drunk Rico, you're going to get very honest, Evan. You're going to get very, I guess, negative, Evan. I guess deep down, that's who I am. Let's get to some more of your emails. There's a lot of, is Pete Hoffman right about Brandon Nimmo? I got a few of these. Back of the lineup, Brandon. Dan writes, I know everyone thinks he's baseball Jesus, but the offense just looks so much better without Nimmo in the 2-3 hole. Center field, top of the order, Brandon is dead, and it's time to start viewing and using him differently. Besides just being flat out terrible lately, he also strikes out way too much and kills any momentum this team has when he gets up behind Lindor. You can put him either 5 behind Pete or 6 behind Vientos. I'm more in favor of having the old school Iglesias type contact hitter batting second. And at this point, just leave that spot open and let Magic Mendoza pencil in whoever he wants there, because whatever the lineup voodoo this guy uses just works. It's so true, right? I mean, Tyrone Taylor as a second place hitter, we talked about that a few days ago, I hate. And it worked. So I'm not opposed to somebody else batting second. I was giving this a little bit of thought. One thing you could do, because we mentioned Iglesias, Dan mentioned Iglesias, and look, Iglesias continues to hit just when you think he's cooling off and his average is starting to dip. Think about what he did in this game. He starts it off with a double right after Francisco Lindor. I don't know how much longer that's going to last, but it's working. So for now, as long as he hits, that's certainly an option. One other thing I was thinking about, and I think I mentioned this on the last Rico, is Vientos in that 2-hole, where you can go Lindor 1, Vientos 2, JD 3, Pete 4, and then Brandon Nimmo 5, I guess Alvarez 6, McNeil 7, if you want to split up the lefties, which I think is overrated. By the way, look at Brandon Nimmo's splits this season. He's hit better against lefties than righties. Jeff McNeil's been as productive against lefties as he has against righties. So I do think, especially with those guys, it's vastly overrated. I don't mind dropping Nimmo in the batting order. This slump has extended about 35 games, which is a pretty long period of time. His second half numbers continue to be dreadful. And one thing we've seen, and Mendy's done a good job of communicating this with the roster, is that he's going to move guys around. I mean, he moves guys around faster than I and a lot of fans typically would. I guess fans typically want to make lineup changes. Mendy makes them very, very quickly. I still don't like Tyrone Taylor in the 2-hole, by the way, or Harrison Bader. Jeff McNeil, we talked about him before. I'm not sure. McNeil's had a couple of at-bats on this road trip that remind you of first half Jeff McNeil. So Vientos in the 2-hole makes sense. I thought Vientos' home run in Game 3 of this series was also very, very important. He was 0 for his last 10. He looked a little bit slow defensively. So I think to have Vientos give you that pop, and also made some pretty good plays defensively, including one late in the game where he made that diving stop, was unable to get up and make the throw. I thought that was a very good sign. Ron Carmen writes with a very good question, which I want everybody to think about. I'll give you my answer. Ron writes, please help. Hey, Evan, you've got to help me figure out who we should root for in this Diamondbacks-Phillies series. I'm honestly confused. On the one hand, there's the division. On the other hand, there's the wild card. Please help me figure this out. So there are 4 games coming up over the weekend between the Philadelphia Phillies and the Arizona Diamondbacks. The Phillies have been cool. The Diamondbacks have been just ridiculous. They took the Guardians and spanked them all over the place. They're never out of a game, and Arizona's jumped to 11 games above 500. So to me, the answer is you root for the Philadelphia Phillies, and I will tell you why. It's not necessarily giving up on the division. It's just being honest about what's most realistic. The Mets are 8 games behind the Phillies in the loss column. And I think that even though they do have 7 head-to-head games, which I acknowledge, you can't assume you're winning 7 games against the Phillies. Like, to me, best case scenario, if you can get to within 4 games of Philadelphia, and then you win 5 out of 7 during that 7-game stretch, 7 out of 10 games that you play, I'm sure you can get back in the race. And I'm not saying it's impossible, because look, the Phillies have played mediocre baseball. And when you lay out that scenario, hey, they're 8 games out. Can you just get within 3 or 4 by the time you play them in a month and a half? It doesn't sound like it's the most unrealistic thing in the world. But I want to make the playoffs. That is the number one goal. And I don't give a crap how they make the playoffs. Wild card 3, wild card 2, wild card 1. Sure, the division would be amazing. You need to give yourself as many avenues to making the postseason as humanly possible. Right now, because the Braves are playing bad and they've lost 5 in a row and the Mets have surpassed them, it's easy to say, oh, well, we call it the Braves. The Braves may get hot and the Diamondbacks may get cooled off again and the Padres may get cooled off again. You have 3 different ways to make the playoffs in a National League wildcard spot, and you're pretty close to all 3 of them. So I would be rooting very passionately against any one of those teams in a wildcard race because it just gives you an avenue to make the postseason. The division's a dream. It'd be amazing. I mean, obviously, like winning the division would be what a comeback that would be. By the way, at the beginning of the season, I think I bet $50 on the Mets to win the NL East with some crazy odds. So I don't know what I'd win, but it'd be a lot. But I just don't think it's as realistic. So I'm sure there are people out there that disagree. Maybe the more optimistic Met fan, or maybe the person that just can never find themselves rooting for Philadelphia. And I totally get that. The Phillies are a disgusting, horrible franchise. Why would we ever root for them? But just to answer Ron, I would definitely be more on the line of, I want Arizona to lose. I know they're playing well. Remember, the Mets have a big series against them at the end of the month. And I want as many avenues to make the postseason. Would you like to hear a song? We got a song in our Rico B mailbag from Daniel Mulaney. Daniel writes, I like Big Buto and I cannot lie. You other hitters can't deny. When Jose Buto's on the mound with heat in your face, striking you out all over the place, you swing and miss. I think I screwed up how the tone should have been, but definitely feel free for everyone out there to write your own verse of I like Big Buto and I cannot lie, because who doesn't love Big Buto? I mean, he's our guy right now. He is the most valuable reliever on this team. And it's funny, we talked about, let's see what they do with the deadline. There could be a scenario where he makes sense in the rotation. Luckily, they added Paul Blackburn, and Buto fits in the bullpen. And it worked out very, very well. Will Weber writes, Evan, when do we start talking about Francisco Alvarez's defense? I feel like he's regressed, and there are pass balls, lazy backhands, etc. all the time. It led to the game-tying run yesterday. The little things on defense continue to kill this team. It needs to get better. So Alvarez's defense has gone backwards. Keith Hernandez gets frustrated by this all the time. I get the same impression that Alvarez is being taught what a lot of catchers are being taught, which is framing is more important than blocking. I mean, how many times, and this has happened a lot in situations that don't even lead to anything, but I notice them, where Alvarez is literally trying to frame a pitch, and the pitch is in the dirt, and it's getting past them because they are trying so hard to frame and steal a strike. And Alvarez is good at it. I give him a lot of credit. And for now, this is a big part of baseball because you can steal a strike, especially against some of these bad umpires like Gene, the home plate umpire from the other night, whatever his name is. But I do think that is contributing to balls getting past the catcher. And that has certainly happened to Francisco Alvarez a handful of times. So I think that's been a big part of where these pass balls and wild pitches are coming from. Fred writes, why don't more players try to steal a run when runners are on the corners? Tonight we just saw Francisco Lindor, this is game 2 of this series, get thrown out trying to steal second while Taylor stayed at third. Why not force the issue, especially with Taylor's speed? Given how terrible this lineup has been with runners in scoring position, I'd love to see them try it sometimes. Yeah, so in the second inning of game 2 of this series, the Mets were set up. They had first and third, and this was with 2 outs as well. So even more of a reason to try to steal that run. The runner on third, though, in this case, I don't think was Tyrone Taylor. I'm checking out my scorecard. It was actually Ben Gamble, who has decent speed, by the way. It's not like we're talking about somebody all that slow. But, yeah, I think the problem with it was that wasn't a play that was put on. That was Lindor trying to steal second base. That's all it was. He was just literally trying to steal second base, thinking he would get a free kind of road to get there because there was first and third, maybe thinking that Elias Diaz wouldn't throw down. And Diaz made a perfect throw and he threw him out. But yeah, I think there are certain circumstances where that would make a lot of sense. In that case, maybe not necessarily. Mike Berry writes, Evan, nice drunken Rico. Last night's game was the first time I thought to myself, and by the way, when he says last night's game, he's referring to game one of this series, the night where we did do the drunken Rico. He writes, that was the first game I thought to myself, Buck Showalter would have won this one. Maybe I'm crazy, but I feel like he would have noticed the loose fencing prior to the game. Maybe he wouldn't have gotten it fixed, or at the very least, he would have made sure his players were aware. Vientos got caught with his eye off the ball. Literally, Buck wouldn't have let that happen. It cost them only one run, but it was a huge part of the game. Who knows the outcome if it didn't happen? Yeah, so I ended up hearing, and I think Gary Cohen mentioned this on the broadcast, and of course, for those that don't remember the play, it was the wild throw that Vientos couldn't hold on to, and it got into the net in front of the Rockies dugout, and there was a hole in the net. The ball went through into the dugout, and it gave Colorado an extra base, gave him a run, gave Chris Bryant, I think was the base runner, gave him third base. So Gary Cohen says that the ground rules at Coors Field say that even if there wasn't a hole, the ball would have still got stuck in the net. Hence, everyone would have gotten the extra base anyway. So that's the way they explained it. I don't know. It's a weird freaking rule to me. It's also weird that there's a hole in the net, but I like that. Because Mike Berry is pointing out one thing that Buck was very, very good at, which was going over ground rules, knowing every rule in the world. But you know what Buck wasn't good at? And I hate to take a giant dump on Buck Showalter right now, but I do think about this. His hatred of Mark Vientos. Explain that one. Like, we talked about this on past Ricos years ago. He wouldn't just not believe in Mark Vientos by not playing him. He made a comment at the end of the 2022 season that still sticks with me. It's been 2 years, where one of the reporters was talking about Vientos having a great year in the minors, and Buck was like, great at what? Like, it was a very sarcastic kind of tone. He never believed him. And quite frankly, he was wrong. Now, you could argue, I guess, that Vientos' humbling that he took at the hands of Buck Showalter, at the hands of Billy Epler, even earlier this season at the hands of David Stearns, somehow contributed to what he is now. Sure, whatever. I guess you could argue that. But Buck Showalter was very, very, very wrong about Mark Vientos, because one of the reasons the Mets are here in a wild card spot, sitting at how many games above 500 now? 61-54, 7 games above 500, is because of Mark Vientos. Now, let me get to the bullpen stuff, because I do find this decision to be very interesting. Sean Reed Foley and Reed Garrett are on their way back. And it looks like Reed Garrett is going to be activated over the weekend in Seattle, and the Mets have a decision to make. They have to get rid of a pitcher. So let's go through the options. I'll tell you what I would do. People are going to hate me for saying it, but that's fine. So you've got, I'll go through all the names. Ryan Stanek is safe. Jose Budo is safe. Phil Maton is safe. Edwin Diaz is safe. Huascar Brazoban is safe. So 5 of the 8 pitchers are safe. One of these 3 names I'm about to mention are going to have to go if for Reed Garrett to get a roster spot back. You've got lefty Danny Young, you've got lefty Alex Young, and you've got Adam Ottavino. All 3 of those guys over the recent period of time, last couple of weeks, they've all pitched well enough to stay. Adam Ottavino, and I know this annoys people because everybody hates Adam Ottavino, and sometimes I do too. He drives me nuts. He drives us all nuts. Hasn't allowed a run in 7 consecutive performances. It's easy to forget that because his performances are so shaky, where there are base runners constantly. So it's easy to not think that Adam Ottavino has put that kind of stretch together, but he has put that kind of stretch together. I would not DFA Adam Ottavino. Sorry. Will eventually the Mets be forced to DFA Adam Ottavino? That may be coming, because it's not just Reed Garrett who's going to be activated this weekend. Sean Reed Foley eventually will need to be activated. And then the guy I'm most excited about, assuming his rehab continues well, he has not pitched in a rehab game, but is starting to get closer, is Dednail Nunez. So if they're going to activate all three of those guys, then I would certainly eventually say to you, hey, Adam Ottavino's the guy to go. But as of right now, he's not. And the reason to me he's not is because you can option Danny Young. And Danny Young pitched 2 innings in the finale against Colorado. He's been okay. Okay. This is not, vitriol against Danny Young. But to me, this is a simple numbers game. If I can send someone down and keep them and not have to lose them, why wouldn't I do that? I have no idea if Reed Garrett's going to stay healthy. I have no idea if Alex Young is going to continue to pitch well. I have no idea if all those guys I just mentioned who are safe in the Met bullpen are also going to remain healthy. So for now, because everyone's pitching well, like if Adam Ottavino was pitching horribly lately, then I'd probably agree with the mass majority of people listening who just say, DFA him, he sucks. He's pitched reasonably well. And I have a chance to keep him, not just lose him for nothing, and also keep Danny Young. So for me, I would option Danny Young to the minor leagues. That's what I would do for now. Eventually, with Sean Reed-Foley and Dednell Nunez, the choices are going to become tough. Now, the funny thing about baseball is usually these tough decisions take care of themselves. But there's a good problem to have because it means there are going to be more bullpen options at the disposal of Carlos Mendoza. Great sign that Starling Marte is playing rehab games. Remember, the rules for position players are 20 days. So once a guy starts a rehab assignment, they have to be activated within 20 days. Starling started his a few days ago. So we're looking, and I don't think he's going to need all 20 days necessarily, but you're looking at maybe about 2 weeks, maybe less, for Marte's return. That's an easy one. Ben Gamel goes back to AAA. I think what's going to be interesting is how Mendy divvies up the playing time, especially with Jesse Winker playing well, with Jose Iglesias playing well, because that impacts McNeil, with Tyler Montero playing well. I think the safe answer with Marte is you ease him back in. And for those that are down on Brandon Nimmo, Brandon better start hitting. Because if he doesn't start hitting, he's going to lose a lot of at-bats. Because I think Mendy's going to play the hot hand as this season rolls on. So we'll keep an eye on how they make the decision over the weekend with the bullpen. But to me, I would option Danny Young to the minor leagues. I would activate Reed Garrett. And hopefully we get to see April Reed Garrett because he was so good first month of the season. Then he struggled. Then he pitched well again. Then he struggled. And then he got hurt. 3 righties over the weekend against the Mariners. Bryce Miller on Friday, Logan Gilbert on Saturday, Luis Castillo on Sunday, 10 o'clock game, and then a 7 o'clock game. How about that? Major League Baseball really punishing the Mets by saying after a very long road trip, we're going to have you end it with an ESPN Sunday night game. So that should be a lot of fun. But if they can win 2 or 3, they can accomplish that goal I set out of a 6-4 road trip. But Met fans, we're in a playoff spot. How long that will last, who the hell knows, but enjoy it. We do appreciate you listening. Download it, subscribing to Rico Brogna. You can always drop us an email at ricob@gmail.com. We'll definitely give you a Rico Sunday after the series ends against the Seattle Mariners, and you never know. There's always room for a pop-up surprise Rico. We do appreciate you listening, downloading, and subscribing. Another edition of Rico Brogna.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Rico Brogna podcast. It's amazing, isn't it? Make sure you download it now to keep it on you at all times.